For most of my life, I believed I had everything a man could want. I had a stable career, a loving wife, and the unwavering support of my family. My father was a man of strength and wisdom, a provider who had built our family from the ground up, and my mother was the embodiment of patience and quiet resilience. And then there was Emma, my wife of 6 years, a woman who, from the outside, seemed like my perfect match. She was beautiful, intelligent, and carried herself with a grace that made people admire her. I thought we had something unbreakable. We had met in college, both young and ambitious. She studied psychology, and I was working my way through business school. We were opposites in many ways. Emma was social and outgoing, while I was more reserved. But our differences made us work. Or at least, I had thought so. When we married, it felt like a dream. The ceremony was intimate, held in my parents' backyard, the very house where I had grown up. My mother cried as she watched me say my vows, and my father placed a proud hand on my shoulder afterward, telling me I had made the best decision of my life. Emma fit seamlessly into the family. My mother adored her, and my father always had a quiet respect for her intelligence. We weren't without our struggles, but I had convinced myself that every challenge was normal. We went through financial hardships early in our marriage, trying to balance our careers while adjusting to married life. There were arguments about money, about my long work hours, about when to start a family, but I always thought we found a way back to each other. Looking back, I wonder how much of that was just me choosing to see what I wanted to see. It started with small things. Emma was always on her phone, even when we were having dinner together. I dismissed it as stress from work, something I understood all too well. She began staying late at her job, citing project deadlines and increased responsibilities. When I'd pull her into bed at night, trying to rekindle the closeness we once had, she'd turn away, saying she was too tired. I reassured myself that this was just a phase, a passing rough patch. We had started trying for a baby a year ago, and each month that passed without a positive test only added to the strain. I tried to be supportive, to comfort her through the disappointment, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a distance between us, a quiet chasm growing wider with each passing day. I told myself that love was about patience, that marriages go through ebbs and flows, and this was just one of those difficult stretches. What a fool I was. The unease settled into my bones like a slow poison. At first, I ignored it, dismissing it as paranoia, but the little things started piling up. Emma had always been affectionate, always the one to reach for my hand in public, to press a kiss to my cheek when she passed me in the kitchen. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. She seemed distracted all the time, her phone never leaving her hand. In the past, she would scroll mindlessly through social media, but now, she would tilt the screen away from me whenever I walked into the room. When I asked her about it, she just laughed and told me I was being silly. Her excuses became more frequent. A late-night work event, a girls' night out, an impromptu weekend visit to an old college friend. I wanted to believe her, but I started to notice inconsistencies. She would say she was meeting her friend Rachel, but when I asked Rachel about it in passing, she looked confused and said she hadn't seen Emma in months. I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Rachel had misunderstood. Maybe Emma had other friends I didn't know as well. Maybe I just didn't want to face the truth that was staring me in the face. Then there was my father. Growing up, he had been my example of what a man should be: strong, confident, and unwavering. He had been strict when necessary, but never cruel. He provided for us, worked tirelessly to give our family everything we needed. I never had to question where I stood with him. He wasn't overly affectionate, but I knew he loved me in his own way. Lately, though, something had changed. He had always been distant, but now, he seemed almost withdrawn. Whenever Emma came over, he would either leave the room or seem unusually tense. It wasn't something I could put my finger on at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it nagged at me. My father had never been warm toward her, but he had never been cold either. Now, it felt like he was avoiding her altogether. My mother, on the other hand, still doted on Emma as if nothing had changed. She invited her over for tea, asked about her work, laughed at her stories. But I started noticing the way she looked at Emma when she thought no one was watching. A sharp, knowing gaze, like she saw something I didn't. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have paid attention to the way Emma's laughter sounded forced in my parents' house, the way my mother's smile never quite reached her eyes when Emma spoke. But I didn't. I let myself believe that I was imagining things, that I was just stressed from work, from trying to start a family, from the weight of everything pressing down on me. I should have known better, because the cracks in the foundation of my marriage weren't just forming. They had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The more I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, the stronger it became. I told myself that every marriage had rough patches, that Emma was just stressed, that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted between us, and no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the weight of that realization pressed down on me like a slow, suffocating force. Emma wasn't the same woman I had married. The warmth in her touch had faded, replaced by indifference. The easy laughter we once shared had disappeared, and in its place was an emptiness I couldn't explain. She spent more time away from home. Late nights at work became a routine, but when I called her office, she was never there. I checked our shared bank statements and saw unexplained charges, restaurants we had never been to, hotels that made my stomach churn with unspoken possibilities. When I asked her about them, she always had an answer, always a perfectly reasonable excuse, and I wanted so badly to believe her that I never pressed further. I started watching her more closely, taking note of the small details I had overlooked before. The way she lingered in the bathroom after receiving a text. The way she suddenly started dressing differently, paying more attention to her appearance, buying new lingerie when we hadn't been intimate in months. The way she seemed just a little too invested in making sure my schedule stayed predictable, that I wouldn't come home unexpectedly. The shifts weren't just in my marriage. My father continued to distance himself, barely speaking to me when I visited. It wasn't just age catching up to him. There was something else, something he wasn't saying. My mother, on the other hand, seemed more attentive than ever, but there was something forced about her kindness. I started catching her watching me, as if waiting for me to figure something out on my own. There were times when I could have sworn she wanted to say something, when she hesitated just long enough for me to notice. But then she would force a smile and change the subject. The unease in my stomach grew stronger with each passing day, a storm gathering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as Emma slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through every odd moment, every inconsistency, every unspoken truth that I had buried beneath denial. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to wake up and realize that this was all in my head, that I was letting paranoia destroy my marriage. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't the case. I just didn't know how deep the betrayal ran. I had no idea that my entire life was about to collapse around me. The moment that shattered my world didn't come as a dramatic revelation. It wasn't an explosive confrontation or a single undeniable piece of evidence. It was a slow unraveling, a culmination of every ignored instinct, every overlooked sign, every moment I had convinced myself that my marriage was still intact. The truth had been staring me in the face for months, and I had refused to see it. But now, there was no escaping it. It started with a change in Emma's behavior, one so subtle that, had I not already been consumed by suspicion, I might have missed it entirely. She had been careful, meticulous in her deception, but something shifted. She became more cautious with her phone, keeping it on silent, carrying it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. If I entered the room unexpectedly, she would lock the screen so quickly it was almost instinctive. It was clear she was hiding something, but I still had no proof. Then came the night she told me she was going to visit a friend out of town. It was sudden, a last-minute trip, and the way she casually mentioned it over dinner sent a cold wave of unease through me. I nodded, feigning indifference, but my mind was already working through the possibilities. I asked which friend. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before saying Rachel's name. The same Rachel who had told me weeks ago that she hadn't seen Emma in months. My hands clenched under the table, but I forced a smile and told her to have a good time. If she noticed the edge in my voice, she didn't let it show. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, my thoughts spinning in an endless loop. I needed proof. Suspicions weren't enough. If I confronted her with nothing but my gut feeling, she would twist it against me, make me doubt myself again. I needed something concrete. I had never been the kind of man to spy on my wife, but now I had no choice. The next morning, as she packed her bags and kissed me goodbye, I fought the urge to grab her and demand the truth. Instead, I waited. I gave her enough time to leave before I got into my car and followed her. My heart pounded as I stayed just far enough behind to remain unnoticed. She didn't drive toward Rachel's house. She didn't even head in that direction. Instead, she took the highway out of town, toward the outskirts, toward a neighborhood I knew all too well, toward my father's house. At first, I refused to believe what I was seeing. It had to be a mistake. Maybe she had another reason for going there. Maybe she had forgotten something from the last time we visited. But as I watched her pull into the driveway, as I saw my father open the door and step outside to greet her, something inside me broke. He wasn't surprised to see her. He wasn't confused by her presence. Instead, he glanced around quickly, as if making sure no one was watching, before stepping aside to let her in. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest tightened, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I wanted to storm inside, to demand an explanation, to force them to face me. But I didn't. I needed more than this. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I parked down the street and waited. Minutes turned into hours, and still, she didn't leave. My mind raced through every possibility, every excuse, every desperate hope that this wasn't what it seemed. But when the sun began to set and the house remained silent, the truth settled over me like a crushing weight. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. When she finally emerged, her hair disheveled, her blouse slightly wrinkled, I felt something inside me shatter beyond repair. She kissed my father on the cheek before getting into her car and driving away, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. I had all the proof I needed. And soon, so would she. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying the image of Emma stepping out of my father's house over and over again like a cruel, inescapable nightmare. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, some logical reason why my wife, my own wife, had been in my father's home for hours while I sat outside, waiting like a fool. But the look on her face as she left, the way she had straightened her clothes, the way he had kissed her cheek in a way that felt too familiar, too comfortable, told me everything I needed to know. The truth was sickening, and it coiled around my gut like a slow, suffocating poison. I kept thinking about all the moments I had ignored, all the subtle signs I had dismissed as paranoia. My father's sudden coldness, his refusal to look me in the eye whenever Emma was around. My mother's strange glances, the way she hesitated whenever I mentioned my wife. The way Emma had become distant, how she had stopped making love to me while suddenly paying more attention to her appearance. I had been blind, willfully so, and now I was drowning in the reality I had refused to face. When I got home, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat in the dark, my hands still clenched around the steering wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. I thought about all the lies she had told me, all the times she had smiled at me, kissed me, held me in her arms while knowing she was betraying me in the worst way possible. And my father, the man who had raised me, who had shaped the person I had become, had been part of it. I felt a deep, seething rage bubbling beneath my skin, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rage wouldn't help me now. If I confronted her too soon, she would lie. She would twist the truth. She would manipulate me into doubting my own eyes. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. I needed something that would expose them both, something that would make sure neither of them could escape the consequences of their actions. The next few days were a blur. I barely slept. I barely ate. I installed a tracking app on Emma's phone while she was in the shower, a simple program that would show me her location in real time. It didn't take long for my suspicions to be confirmed. She continued her visits to my father's house, always careful, always making sure she went when she thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. I tracked every movement, every lie, every betrayal. Then came the moment that pushed me past the point of no return. I had suspected it, but seeing it written in cold, Undeniable numbers made my stomach churn with disgust. The bank statements, payments from Emma's account, hotel rooms, expensive gifts, unexplained withdrawals of cash. And then, from my father's account, matching deposits. He was paying for her, supporting her, funding their affair. That was when the rage became something else entirely. Cold, calculated, unrelenting. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy them. I had all the proof I needed, but I didn't want just proof. I wanted retribution. I wasn't interested in yelling and fighting, in some dramatic confrontation that would give them a chance to weasel their way out. I wanted Emma and my father to feel the weight of their choices, to watch their perfect little secret collapse in front of them. I wanted to strip them of the comfort they had built on the ruins of my marriage and my trust. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was war. I moved with quiet precision, calculating every step before making a move. The first thing I did was consult a lawyer. I explained my situation in cold, measured words, laying out the evidence I had gathered. Her infidelity, the financial transactions, the tracking data, everything. The lawyer's expression remained neutral, but I could see the flicker of intrigue in his eyes as I outlined what I wanted. A divorce, yes, but not just a clean break. I wanted to leave her with nothing. I wanted to hit her where it hurt the most. Her wallet, her security, and her reputation. He assured me that with the evidence I had, we could not only file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, but also pursue financial damages. She wouldn't walk away from this unscathed. The second step was ensuring that my mother knew. I had suspected for some time that she was aware of what was happening, but I needed to confirm it. When I visited her, she seemed nervous, her usual warmth forced, her hands fidgeting as she poured my tea. I let the silence stretch, watching her, waiting. And then, finally, she sighed and set her cup down with a quiet clink against the saucer. You know, don't you? Her voice was soft, almost resigned. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to hear it from her. I wanted to know how long she had kept this secret, how long she had stood by and allowed this to happen. When she finally spoke again, her voice was thick with guilt. I saw them once. Months ago. I walked in on them. Your father didn't see me, but Emma did. She begged me not to tell you. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No sadness. Just a hollow emptiness where trust used to be. I wanted to tell you, but I cut her off before she could offer excuses. But you didn't. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I stood, my movements slow and deliberate. I need you to do something for me, I said, my voice calm, measured. When the time comes, when everything comes crashing down, I need you to stay out of it. Don't protect him. Don't protect her. Just let them burn. She nodded, silent tears slipping down her face. I walked out without another word. The third step was setting the trap. I planned a business trip, an excuse to be out of town for a few days. I made sure Emma believed it, even going so far as to pack a suitcase and leave my car at the airport. But I never got on a plane. Instead, I returned home late that night, slipping into the darkness like a ghost. I parked a few blocks away and walked quietly toward my father's house. I already knew she was there. The tracking app had confirmed it. I stood outside for a long moment, staring at the home where I had spent my childhood. A house filled with memories, now tainted beyond repair. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped forward. This was it, the beginning of the end. The night was silent except for the sound of my own footsteps as I approached my father's house. The weight of betrayal settled deep in my chest, pressing down like an unbearable force, but I refused to let it break me. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, crafting every detail in my mind, ensuring that when the truth came crashing down, neither Emma nor my father would be able to escape the consequences. This wasn't just about confronting them. It was about making them face what they had done, about ripping away every layer of secrecy they had wrapped themselves in. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the upstairs window, his bedroom. The bedroom where I had once heard my mother's laughter, where my parents had built a life together. Now, it was defiled. I stood outside for a moment, my pulse steady despite the storm of emotions raging beneath the surface. Then, I pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and hit record. I walked up to the door and twisted the knob. Unlocked. They were careless, arrogant, secure in their belief that they were untouchable. My father had always been a man who controlled everything, who believed he was above consequence. And Emma, she had once been my wife, my partner, the person I had trusted with my life. Now, she was nothing more than a stranger. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, moving with slow, deliberate steps through the familiar halls. The muffled sounds of their voices drifted down the stairs, laughter mixing with soft whispers. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't need rage. I needed control. As I reached the second floor, their words became clearer. Emma's voice was light, playful. "Do you think he knows?" she asked, amusement lacing her tone. My father chuckled, a deep, familiar sound that now made my skin crawl. "He's a fool. If he hasn't figured it out by now, he never will." That was the moment the last thread of restraint inside me snapped. I pushed the door open with enough force to send it slamming against the wall. The scene before me was exactly what I had expected. Emma, wrapped in nothing but a sheet, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face frozen in shock. My father, bare-chested, a look of pure horror flashing across his face as he scrambled to sit up. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. I let it stretch, let the weight of my presence settle over them like a noose tightening around their necks. Then, I lifted my phone, the red recording light glowing in the dim room. "Smile," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You're on camera." Emma's face drained of color as she clutched the sheet tighter around her body. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, the pathetic, predictable excuse tumbling from her lips as if it could erase the truth of what I had just walked into. My father didn't say a word. He just stared at me, his jaw clenched, his body tense. He knew there was no escape, no excuse, no justification that could undo what he had done. I took a slow step forward, my gaze never leaving them. "I've been watching you for weeks," I said, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the thick air. "I know everything. The hotel stays, the secret meetings, the money transfers. Every single time you thought you were being careful, I was one step ahead." Emma let out a choked sob, shaking her head. "Please, just—" I ignored her and turned to my father. "You're the man who taught me about honor, about loyalty, about family. And yet, you were the one who destroyed it." My voice remained steady, but inside, I was unraveling. "You looked me in the eye every day, knowing what you were doing. And you had the audacity to think I'd never find out?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I let out a cold, bitter laugh. "Oh? And how exactly was it supposed to happen?" I gestured toward Emma. "Were you waiting for me to find out on my own? Or were you planning to keep playing house with my wife until it became too inconvenient?" Neither of them had an answer. I took another step forward, lowering my phone but keeping it recording. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "You're both going to face the consequences of what you've done. Emma, our marriage is over. My lawyer will be in touch, and I will make sure you walk away with nothing. You don't deserve a single cent of what we built together." Emma's breath hitched, and for the first time, true panic flashed in her eyes. "No, please, we can talk about this, we can fix this. There is no we anymore," I cut in, my voice like ice. "You made sure of that." Then, I turned to my father, meeting his gaze with a cold finality. "As for you, you're no longer my father. You don't exist to me anymore." The weight of those words settled between us like a final nail in the coffin. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but I didn't care. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, my heart pounding but my mind clear. I had done what I came to do. The reckoning had begun. As I stepped out of the house, the night air hit me like a wave, cool and refreshing. I had spent weeks drowning in betrayal, in anger, in the suffocating weight of their deception. But now, for the first time, I felt something else. Relief. This was just the beginning. The war wasn't over yet, but they had made their choice. Now, it was time for them to suffer the consequences. The days after the confrontation were a blur of cold calculation and quiet destruction. Emma had tried calling, texting, even showing up at the house, but I ignored her every attempt. The only communication she would receive from me would come through my lawyer. My father didn't even try. Whether out of shame or sheer cowardice, he stayed silent, leaving my mother to relay messages I refused to acknowledge. The man was dead to me. But there was still one final truth to uncover. A week after I exposed them, Emma called me one last time. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something inside me made me answer. Her voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "I need to talk to you," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's important." I had no patience for her, no sympathy left to give. "Say what you need to say, and then lose my number." She hesitated. I could hear her breathing, uneven and anxious. "I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I said nothing, the world around me shrinking into suffocating silence. Pregnant. The child we had tried for. The child we had hoped for, dreamed about. And now, after all of this, she had the audacity to tell me now. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. "And why exactly are you telling me this?" She sniffled. "Because it's yours." I almost laughed at the sheer desperation in her voice. "No, it isn't. I swear. I don't believe a single word that comes out of your mouth," I cut in coldly. "But don't worry. We'll get a DNA test and prove it." She tried to protest, to insist that it wasn't necessary, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. I set up the test immediately, making it clear that if she refused, I would assume she already knew the truth. The results came back a week later. I sat in my lawyer's office, the envelope lying on the desk between us. My hands were steady as I opened it, my heart already knowing the answer before I even saw the words. Probability of paternity, 0%. I exhaled slowly, my body numb. There it was, in black and white. Undeniable, irrefutable proof that the child wasn't mine, that it was his, my father's. I had already severed my marriage. I had already buried my father in my mind. But this was something else. This was the final, grotesque nail in the coffin of everything I had once held sacred. The betrayal wasn't just between them. It had created life. A permanent, living reminder of their deception. Emma called again, but I didn't answer. Instead, I sent her the results. No words, no explanation, just the undeniable truth. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a single message from her. "Please, we need to talk." I blocked her number. As for my father, I sent him the same result. He didn't reply. Not a single word. Coward. But I wasn't finished yet. The divorce proceedings accelerated, and with my lawyer's help, I ensured Emma left with nothing. The house, the savings, the assets, she got none of it. She tried to fight, tried to argue. But I had enough leverage to ensure that she had no ground to stand on. When the dust settled, she had no choice but to walk away empty-handed, carrying only the weight of her shame and the child she had conceived through betrayal. I never spoke to her again. As for my father, I did the only thing left to do. I erased him from my life. My mother tried to mend things, tried to act as a bridge between us, but I made it clear that he was nothing to me. He wasn't my father anymore. Whatever respect or love I had once had for him had died the moment I saw the DNA test. He had taken everything from me, my wife, my trust, my future. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of taking any more. The day my divorce was finalized, I stood outside the courthouse, taking in the crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in months. I had lost a marriage, a father, and the future I had once envisioned. But in losing them, I had also freed myself. This was the end, but it was also the beginning. The DNA test had confirmed what I already knew, but seeing it in writing made it all the more real. My father had not only betrayed me, he had created life with my wife. I had expected rage, but what I felt was something colder, sharper. It wasn't enough for them to suffer in silence, to slink away and try to rebuild their lives elsewhere. They had destroyed everything I held sacred, and I would make sure they paid for it in full. The first step was financial ruin. Emma had walked away from the divorce with nothing, but that wasn't enough. I wanted to ensure that she had no easy path forward. While married, she had relied on my financial stability, her job being secondary to our household income. Now, she had neither me nor my money. I knew she would struggle, and I intended to make it worse. With the help of my lawyer, I ensured that our shared debts, credit cards, loans, everything that was in both our names, were legally shifted to her responsibility. The accounts had been in both our names, but since I had paid for everything, I was able to use that to my advantage. The legal system worked in my favor, and when the paperwork was finalized, Emma found herself drowning in debt she had no way of escaping. Next was my father. Cutting him off wasn't enough. I wanted to dismantle the legacy he had built. He prided himself on his reputation, the successful image he had maintained for years, but I knew the truth. He was weak. He had used my mother's devotion, my respect, and his position to shield himself from consequence. He had hidden behind his title, his wealth, his family. I would take all of it from him. It started small. I leaked the story within our social circles, carefully crafted whispers, just enough to ensure the right people heard. The scandal spread like wildfire. His colleagues, the people who once respected him, now viewed him with disgust. The whispers turned into open accusations, and soon, his professional standing began to crumble. But that wasn't the final blow. I went to my mother and laid everything out before her. I showed her the DNA results, the financial transactions, the years of lies. She had already known about the affair, but seeing how deep the betrayal ran shattered her. I told her she had a choice: stand by him or walk away. I made it clear that if she chose to stay, I would be gone forever. She chose me. She filed for divorce, taking half of everything he owned. My father, once a powerful and respected man, was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own making. His family was gone, his career in ruins, his reputation forever tarnished. He had traded everything for a fleeting, pathetic affair, and now he had nothing. Emma, now alone, reached out to me one last time. I didn't answer. Instead, I sent her one final message. You deserve everything coming to you. Goodbye. Then I blocked her forever. With my father disowned, my marriage dissolved, and my revenge complete, I stood at the edge of my old life and finally let go. I had nothing left to tie me to that pain, nothing left to keep me bound to their betrayal. I was free, and that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. Revenge had been satisfying, but it wasn't the end. After everything was said and done, I found myself standing in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. My marriage was gone. My father was dead to me. My mother, despite finally seeing the truth, was a broken woman trying to pick up the pieces of her own betrayal. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was almost deafening. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. I took time off work, not because I needed it, but because I didn't know what else to do. The rage that had fueled me for months had burned itself out, leaving behind something hollow and unfamiliar. I had spent so much time dismantling their lives that I had forgotten to think about my own. Who was I now? What did I even want? The house felt like a tomb, filled with ghosts of memories that no longer felt like mine. I couldn't walk past the bedroom without feeling sick. The kitchen table, where we had once planned our future, felt like a cruel joke. Every inch of the home I had built with Emma was tainted, poisoned beyond repair. I had won, but victory tasted bitter when I had nothing left to enjoy. So I did the only thing that made sense. I left. I sold the house, every piece of it. I didn't care about the money, didn't care about what it was worth. I just wanted it gone. I packed what little I cared to keep and signed the rest away. Let the memories rot with the walls that had once held them. I moved into a new apartment across the city, one that had no history, no ghosts, no past. I needed to start over, to build something new. At first, it was strange, waking up in an unfamiliar space, surrounded by nothing but silence. But after a while, I realized that silence wasn't so bad. It wasn't loneliness, it was peace. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years I spent wrapped up in a marriage that had been a lie. I went out more, not because I was looking for anything, but because I was learning to enjoy life again, piece by piece. It was slow, but it was real. My mother tried to reach out, tried to mend what had been broken, but I kept my distance. I didn't blame her, not entirely, but she had made her choice when she stayed silent. Some wounds don't heal just because you want them to. Some things are too broken to be fixed. Maybe, one day, I would find it in me to forgive her. But not yet. Emma and my father faded from my world like a bad dream. Occasionally, I would hear whispers of their downfall, how my father had struggled to keep up appearances, how Emma had fallen into financial ruin, burdened with debts and abandoned by the very man she had destroyed me for. But I didn't care. They were nothing to me now. Their suffering was no longer my concern. One night, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, staring out at the city lights, I realized something. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't thinking about them. I wasn't replaying the betrayal, wasn't reliving the pain. I was just here, in this moment, and I was finally free. Months passed, and with each day, the weight of the past lessened. At first, it had clung to me like a shadow, whispering reminders of what had been stolen from me. But time, relentless and indifferent, chipped away at the pain. The rage no longer consumed me. The betrayal no longer defined me. I had survived, and now I was learning to live again. Emma had tried to reach out once more, a last, desperate attempt to mend something that could never be fixed. She sent an email, long, rambling, filled with regret and hollow apologies. She begged me to talk, to hear her out, to believe that she had never meant to hurt me. I read it once, then deleted it without responding. She was my past, and I had no interest in dragging her into my future. As for my father, he had faded into obscurity. After my mother left him, he lost nearly everything. His colleagues distanced themselves, his reputation was in ruins, and whatever power he once held was gone. He tried to reach out once, through my mother, but I shut it down before it even began. He wasn't my father anymore. He was just a man who had made the worst mistake of his life and had no one left to save him. There was no satisfaction in their downfall, no lingering sense of triumph, just emptiness where they used to be, and that was enough. I focused on myself. I threw myself into my work, not as an escape, but because I finally had the energy to care about it again. I traveled, went to places I had always wanted to see but had never made the time for. I met new people, formed new friendships, built a life that had nothing to do with the wreckage I had left behind. One evening, as I sat in a small cafe overlooking the ocean, I realized something that almost made me laugh. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything. The past felt distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. The pain, the betrayal, the need for revenge, it was all gone. For the first time in my life, I had truly let go. I paid my bill, stepped out into the warm night air, and walked forward without ever looking back.